Hello and welcome back to another challenge. This time I'm going to try to beat Sekiro without walking or running. Sekiro is a difficult game. It's probably one of the most difficult, if not the most difficult, game to ever exist. I've beaten Sekiro a couple of times now, so I gave myself another challenge to make the game even harder. I tried to beat Sekiro without moving the left joystick on my controller at all. This means no running away from boss fights, and no directional inputs for traversing through the map. Before we get started, let's go over the rules for this challenge. When I don't have my sword in my hand, I can move. Trust me, I tried everything and you just cannot move in these sections of the game without using the left joystick. I can use the dodge and attack button to move around. I can use prosthetic tools and combat arts to aid in my movement. In some scripted situations, no matter what you do, you can only move. For example, in one instance during the scripted snake section at the start of the game, I had no choice but to move to progress through the game. There were only a total of 2 scenarios that I came across in my playthrough. I cannot use glitches or cheats to help in my playthrough. It has to be a legitimate run of the game. As if this challenge wasn't hard enough, I'm also doing this on my 6th playthrough, so enemies are going to be much harder to beat. I will be doing the Shura ending, which is the shortest ending of the game. Without further ado, let's get into the challenge. So to start off the challenge, I had to actually get my sword first. If you remember one of the rules of the challenge, it was that I had to be holding my sword for the challenge to be active. So I did the usual and went to get my sword. I walked out of the building after talking to Kuro, and this was the first time you pull out your sword in the game, so the challenge had officially started. I started by using the attack button to slowly move forward and took out these samurai enemies pretty quickly. Since I was on a New Game Plus save, I was able to use my Nightjar Monocular to orient myself and then move in that direction by either dodging or attacking. The Monocular and the lock-on feature are going to be essential in this challenge. I made my way forward to this tree, and this was where I faced my first problem in the challenge. I couldn't really get off certain edges and areas in the game because of invisible walls. You'd usually use the movement joystick to push yourself through these invisible walls, but I obviously couldn't do that. I did manage to figure out a solution pretty quickly. The Leaping Monk combat art is one of the only combat arts in the game that actually moves you forward off of in-game objects like tree branches and ledges. This would be a very important tool that I would use in multiple situations in the challenge. This next part almost ended the entire challenge. At first I tried to go under the bridge, but quickly realized that there's no way for me to move on ledges. I did figure out that if I smack my head on something above and quickly grab the ledge again, I can move about a millimeter to the side. But since the bridge is curved, the thing that I was using to bonk my head onto eventually went out of reach. I thought maybe if I moved just far enough to eavesdrop on the conversation of the soldiers on the bridge, I could quit the game and maybe it'll act as a save point and spawn me under the bridge. This didn't work, so the only other way was to clear the other gap under the bridge. This gap is pretty big, so usually you'd sprint and jump at the same time to cover the large distance. The gap was just out of range of the Leaping Monk combat art, and after trying for a very long time, I thought that the challenge was already over and couldn't be done. I tried one last technique where I went to the absolute closest I could to the edge and I dodged off of the edge. I was hoping that the speed of the dodge combined with jumping off of the wall and using the Leaping Monk combat art mid-air would be enough, and after a few tries I finally managed to do a pixel perfect jump to the other side. I carried on down to the door, which required some basic movement and orientation with the monocular, and I used the combat art to get over any ledges. When I met up with Kuro, Wolf put his sword away, which meant that I was allowed to walk to the end of the tunnel. I died to Genichiro and woke up at the temple with the sculptor. Wolf always has his sword sheathed when at the temple, so I walked out until he unsheathed his sword and continued to dash and attack my way to the idol. It was a lot easier than expected from here, since all I had to do was the same as before, and since it was my 6th playthrough I already knew where to go. And now I even had a grappling hook which would allow me to quickly clear large distances, and it also orientates you automatically in the direction of other grappling hook points. I eventually got to my first mandatory boss fight, the Chained Ogre. I tried using a Gachin's Sugar to do the usual sneak attack and get a life point off of the boss, but since I couldn't exactly control where I was going very accurately, I used the lock-on feature to get me to the ogre and just ended up fighting it normally. Since I already had the fire prosthetic tool, this was a pretty easy fight. I did die once since I couldn't move to the side to avoid his grab attack, and he got me just as I was exiting the animation of using an Arco's sugar. Luckily, I had a resurrection node, and after coming back, I rinsed and repeated with the flame vent to defeat the ogre. I carried on dodging and attacking towards the next idol. I jumped and grappled down to the grass area. You can't move while crouched, and dodging takes you out of crouch. So I had to dodge and crouch, dodge, crouch, dodge, crouch to stay out of view of the snake. I got to the shimmy area and moved across since there was no other way of getting across, like I had mentioned earlier in the rules. I almost died since I had to orientate myself to the little shrine box which I mistimed. I hit the snake, turned around at light speed, and made my way out of there. I died right at the end, but it was okay since I still had a resurrection node. I carried on forwards until the next mandatory boss fight. This fight was actually one of the easiest in the game for me, since on my first playthrough of Sekiro, I looked up a tutorial on how to beat Oniwa, and you could do it standing completely still. So I did the same and managed to beat him pretty quickly. I carried on moving through the castle, and after a quick costume change, I was face to face with the Blazing Bull. To be completely honest, I had no idea what to do for this fight, and went in with zero expectations. The plan was to initially use firecrackers as the main method of attack, but during the fight, as the bull charged at me, I panicked, accidentally doing the leaping monk combat art, which was actually extremely effective at completely dodging the bull's charge attack, and even doing some posture damage if I landed on the bull. This combined with parrying, firecrackers, and a bit of healing was all I needed to defeat the bull on my first try. I moved onwards to the next idol and made my way up the castle towards Genichiro. Traversing inside the castle gates was pretty easy since there was a grappling point pretty much everywhere. After defeating the enemies on the castle roof, I used a shield to block the kamikaze enemy and defeated him before moving forward. I had to fight a couple more enemies before I finally got to the open window to get inside the castle. But as I was maneuvering myself to turn the corner, a kamikaze enemy managed to sneak up on me and kill me. It wasn't a big deal since I still had a resurrection node. Since I couldn't sneak, I had no choice but to fight every enemy that I faced. I fought the guards in the castle, using stealth whenever I could. The next boss I would have to face was Jinsuke the Ashina Elite. This wasn't really difficult in the scope of the challenge. I mean, you wouldn't normally be moving much when regularly fighting him anyway. So after a couple of tries and getting the timing down again, I defeated him and moved on to Genichiro. Genichiro was a lot easier than expected. The fact that I've probably fought him over 100 times might be the reason. Just as a side note, I absolutely love this fight. I genuinely believe this is one of the best boss fights to ever exist in any game. The only times I struggled really is when he would pressure me into a corner. I didn't really have a way of getting out unless he backed up or I dodged around him, but there was only a slight chance of either of these happening. As long as the fight was in the center of the arena, I was okay. For his unblockable grab attack, jumping wouldn't do anything and dodging without a directional input from the joystick would just send me right into him. So I had to use the umbrella for this. I got to the second phase, and it was just rinse and repeat, with the occasional lightning reversal, and that was it. Genichiro was defeated on my first try. I talked to Kuro, who told me to talk to Isshin, who told me about some rats. I set my way towards the monkey, and on the way I came across a rather interesting problem. You see, using the combat art leaping monk, I would be locked in the animation until I touched the ground, meaning that I couldn't do anything else mid-air like use my grappling hook. So to cross gaps like this, I couldn't use the combat art. Jumping with the directional input was pretty much the only way to move yourself mid-air, until I realized that there is one prosthetic tool that moves you ever so slightly in the air. The tool in question is the Onikage's flame vent. The force that the fire comes out with causes you to move slightly in the air, similar to how it pushes you back when you fully charge it on the ground. It didn't cover much distance, but it was enough to get me over small obstacles and into the range of grappling hooks that were just out of reach throughout the entire rest of the game. I faced the other way, used the vent in the air, and caught the grappling point as I was falling. For the ranged enemies, I would also use ranged tools like the shuriken. Later, I would just use a Gajin's sugar to get past most of them. I continued my way forward until I reached another problem. Another dead end. A problem without a solution. Similar to the snake incident, the path towards the monkey required me to hug a wall and shimmy along. I tried everything to cover the gap otherwise and tried for around an hour. But instead of giving in just yet, I thought maybe there is an alternative way across. Perhaps a different path that I could take. So I backtracked and instead made my way towards the Senpou Temple. I defeated the bell enemy and made my way through to the underground entrance idol. Here I was faced with yet again another problem. The only way to move when in water was to dodge, which would send me backwards, or to attack, which would send me forwards. I couldn't turn in the water since I couldn't use my nightjar monocular, so I was limited to strictly linear movement forwards and backwards. The only thing I could do was line myself up as well as I could with the next island and hope that I could make it there. I decided to turn around and go to the island with my back towards it, since I could use the flame vent after jumping out of the water to get me onto the land. It took me a couple of tries, but I managed to make it to the next island. I defeated the enemies and lined myself up for the next one. Using the same method, I made it through the final body of water and towards the elevator that would take me up to Senpou Temple. Traversing this area was pretty easy. I stuck to the trees above the monks and used grass for cover. Leaping monk gave me the perfect vertical height to cross the gap at the end, and I jumped into the hole. I went ahead and defeated the monks who spotted me in the next room, and I kicked out of the window and did my best to dodge past and ignore the enemies until I reached the next idol. This next part took me hours. Multiple hours. I was genuinely stuck at this point, since every path that progressed the Senpou Temple story path required me to hang on to a ledge, the normal standard route and the route that takes you to the demon bell. After hours of trying different methods and paths, I felt as if there was yet again another point in the game where I was forced to move. But then I thought, what was the point of the challenge if I just ended up moving whenever I needed to? So I tried for hours, trying this one technique that had the slimmest chances of actually working. 1 in a million, 1 in a billion even. I felt like it was so close, like the edge was scraping at my fingertips every time. I started to lose hope and was almost about to end the challenge or give in and end up moving myself for this section. I'm not sure what happened, but I didn't question it. I finally managed to get across and I wanted nothing more to do with that ledge, so I just moved on as quick as I could. Defeating the knight took me a long time but was quite easy. I know his moveset well enough to be able to consistently fight him for a decent amount of time without making a mistake. It was just a matter of time and trial and error until I eventually got him where he was at one of the edges. I was so glad to see the next checkpoint. I continued my way through the temple, and just before the end, these two ninja guys gave me a really hard time. I died a couple times to them, but then I just ended up sneaking around and using the back entrance. I got the idol checkpoint and went back to Ishin since the praying monk wasn't there. So I went back to the castle gate and killed the rats with the axe prosthetic. I talked to this guy and went back to talk to Ishin. Went back and took care of the monkeys pretty easily on my first try. After getting the mortal blade, it was time to go to Mibu village. I wanted to avoid going to the ape for now since I was still stuck at that point where I had to shimmy along the wall. So I went back underground and toward Mibu village. I fought the Shichimen Warrior, which was much harder than I expected. The Shichimen Warrior was difficult mainly because of how he teleports to the other side of the map once you get 1 or 2 hits on him. After getting his health down as much as I could at the start with Divine Confetti and an Arco's Sugar, I had to use the purple gourd and the umbrella to find windows where I could dash towards him and get close enough for a hit with the umbrella. After a couple of tries, I managed to defeat him using the purple umbrella as my main form of defense and attack. I jumped into the pit and carried onwards through the village. After defeating Snake Eyes, I had to take the legit path towards the Mist Noble, which required defeating Juzo the Drunkard, since the shortcut required too many accurate directional inputs to get onto the tree branch and then onto the roof and so on. I defeated the Drunkard after a couple of attempts, and used this ledge to move forward without having to shimmy along the wall. I did the standard jumps and kicks and made my way towards the Mist Noble. After barely managing to defeat the Noble, I decided to just run as quick as I could through the village. I ignored the enemies, ignored the bosses like the crying music woman, and just ran to the corrupted monk boss fight. Snap seeds and firecrackers is all I have to say for this fight. I got the stone, and now it was time for the monkey. Before giving in and moving along the wall, I wanted to try one last thing. I went to the kite guy in Senpou Temple and used him to get across the valley and planned to get down to the water or kill the snake to use the underground entrance to get to the monkey. Both didn't work out since it was too high and the snake only appears after the bridge attack, which was beyond the point I was stuck at. I was left with no choice but to treat this as the same situation as the previous snake bit. After I shimmied along the wall, I dashed to the next idol and died on purpose. I laid there until the enemies lost interest in me and I got the checkpoints behind their back. I skipped the boss fight with Gun Guy and dodged my way across the bridge, ignoring the enemies until I reached the next idol. Centipede Guy was easy but annoying since he shoved me into a corner and didn't let me move or see. I cheesed these two spirit samurai and carried onwards until I fell into the river after the snake attack. This was a problem. I was in the water with no way to orientate myself, I died to the snake and went back to Senpou Temple to kill the snake and control which direction I would be looking in by jumping into the water from a specific angle. It was going well until I reached the end where Wolf was halfway in the water. He would just stop here. I couldn't attack to move forward and I couldn't dodge to go back since I was in water but I wasn't swimming. Luckily, since I went to Mibu village first, I had the Mibu water breathing technique. I went underwater and locked onto this fish to help me orientate myself towards the land. I carried on through the valley, grappling and dodging until I reached the ape. The ape took me a couple of tries. Developing specific strategies to fight him head on was pretty challenging since this fight is designed to make you move. Almost every attack requires you to run away or dodge in a specific way. The scream attack, the poop attack, the fart attack, just to name a few. I found that the best strategy was to use firecrackers and the mortal blade to quickly get the ape to his second phase, where he was less of a threat. With the remaining emblems I had left, I had to keep them for the umbrella prosthetic to block his scream attack. Everything else was pretty simple. Parry or jump to avoid unblockables, and after a few tries and the use of a ceremonial tanto, I managed to kill the ape and get the flower. This was it. I was at the last fight of the game. I went back to Ashina Castle underground entrance and made my way into the water. Once again, very conveniently, there was a fish to help me maneuver myself in the right direction. After that, it was the same as before. Grapple and defeat enemies to get to the top of the castle. When I reached the second last room, I realized that I had completely forgotten about the double ninja fight. I absolutely hate this fight. From the moveset, to the poison, to there being two of them. Everything about this boss fight sucks. I went ahead and did the standard, possess one of them and fight the other. The main guy was a pain in the His attacks would repeatedly put me into the corner, he had poison attacks, and even the unblockable couldn't be blocked by my umbrella. Eventually, I got the rhythm of the fight, and after quickly draining his first health bar with some charged mortal blade hits, I only had to defeat him once legitimately. After confirming the Shura ending, it was time to fight Emma, who was a cakewalk. And Ishin. I expected Ishin to be unbelievably difficult, but he just wasn't. It took me a couple of tries, but the first phase was always easy since it didn't really require you to move. It was the second phase that was difficult since there were moves that were designed to make you move in specific ways or to specific locations. For his fire in the ground attack, all I had to do was dodge or attack into an area without fire, which seemed pretty easy, but really it was RNG most of the time, depending on where I was standing, since the two ways I can move me a fixed distance. Sometimes he did get me, but most of the time I was able to find a safe space and open my umbrella to avoid his subsequent attacks and respond with a counterattack. For his other two fire moves, the one with the long line of fire could be completely blocked with the fire umbrella, But the other attack was much harder to consistently avoid with the umbrella, which is what I tried doing for the first couple of times. I ended up noticing that if I locked onto Ishin and dodged a couple times as he was starting to do that move, I could end up completely behind him or next to him and avoid the move completely. All the other moves were the same from the first phase, all of which can be parried, makiried, or blocked with the umbrella. It took me only a handful of tries, and after defeating Ishin, I had finally completed the challenge. So, can you actually beat Sekiro without moving? Technically not, since there are parts of the game, even when you have your sword out, that will require you to move. Coincidentally, both of these were of the same nature, which was shimmying across walls. But if you ask me, I think that this challenge was an absolute success. Beating the bosses without moving and having to find creative ways to move around the map was extremely fun. If you enjoyed this challenge and want to see me do more creative fun challenges, make sure you subscribe and like the video. Leave some comments down below for some possible ideas in the future. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed.